My husband and I have the best relationship. We've been married for 24 years and counting. He still makes breakfast for me every day, and I still tell him I love him every night. We have our divergences, but we work through them as a couple, as a team. It wasn't always like that, though. We met almost 30 years ago. I was 19, he was 21. We were madly in love from the start. So much that I thought it would be fitting to change our wedding vows from "till death do you part" to "for eternity." After we had been married for around a year, we started trying for a baby. We tried and tried until we learned we couldn't have children. My uterus was the wrong shape, according to the doctor. As in many other cases, this put a strain on our relationship. The stress and resentment started to build up on both ends, and we started fighting a lot. First came some small disagreements, then they started growing and growing. By the end, every small thing would end up in a screaming match. One day I was doing my stuff around the house and needed to pee. In a hurry, I sat on the toilet without looking. I gasped in horror as my body sank and my butt touched the porcelain inside. I got up and saw the seat was up. I marched to my husband and started yelling at him. "Can't you just leave the seat down? Are you that much of a baby?" He opened his mouth to answer me, but he just closed it back, closed his eyes, and sighed. "I need some time alone." With that, he went for the door and left in his car. That night, the police came to my door, telling me he had been in an accident. They said he was at the hospital in critical condition and that I should go there as soon as possible. I could not bear my regret. I started sobbing and asked the officers if they could take me there. I was in no condition to drive. They looked at each other and the one by my doorstep said, "Ma'am, this is not standard procedure, but sure, we'll give you a ride." From then on, my memory is patchy. I read that's a normal response to trauma. I remember the doctor saying they weren't sure he was going to make it. I remember seeing him hooked to all the life support machines at the hospital. Next thing I remember is him at home already. The accident left him on a wheelchair. Because of that, I was now mostly in charge of everything, but he still tried to help. 2 or 3 days after he came home, I remember him saying, "I want to cling to life, and you are my life." From then on, we realized our problems were tiny compared to losing each other, and our fight stopped. We still have disagreements, but we talk about them as a couple. Because of all the trauma and being on a wheelchair, he didn't want to leave the house ever since. I respected his will for years, but at this point I felt like he really needed to go out. So I booked a surprise vacation for us at a place that is accessible for wheelchairs. Today I was looking for the reservation papers. I'm a bit messy and I lose stuff easily, and I looked in a drawer that I rarely use. I found a paper and checked if it was it. Right now I'm packing. I'm not sure where I'll go, but I'll go alone. My husband asked from the kitchen, "Baby, what are you up to?" And I replied, "Just tidying up the wardrobes." I can't let him know. I mean, how do you tell someone you found their death certificate? Where do I even begin? I guess this all started a little while after our move to Maple Street. My wife and I had finally managed to save enough money for a down payment on a small house in Hampstead, our beloved little hometown. We had lived in our quaint new bungalow for a couple days and were still unpacking our things when we got a knock at the front door. Opening it up, we saw a couple standing there holding a casserole dish. They smiled at us warmly and told us they lived next door, and were welcoming us to the neighborhood on behalf of everyone. "Wow, that's so nice of you," I said to them, taking the dish they offered us. "I'm Jordan, and this is my wife, Christine." They introduced themselves as Sarah and Greg, a married couple from next door. We spoke for a few minutes, but they didn't seem to want to overstay their welcome. Shortly after arriving, they said they would be on their way. "Let us know if you need anything at all," said Greg. "I mean that. If you need to borrow a cup of sugar, whatever, we're happy to help out." "Thanks. That's really generous of you." "Hey, that's what neighbors are for, right?" Not 2 weeks passed before I took them up on their offer. It's not like I was trying to take advantage of them or anything, but I was putting together a new table and couldn't find my tools anywhere. It seemed like they had been lost during the move. I just needed a screwdriver, so I went over to Greg and Sarah's place and knocked on the door. Greg answered and said he would be happy to let me borrow a Phillips head. He invited me into his garage while he went to look for it. He opened the garage door and I went in to join him. Upon entering, I realized that Greg was a compulsive neat freak. He had labeled drawers and cabinets for everything, and I was amazed to see an assortment of hammers, axes, and saws hanging from the wall, sorted by size and type of tool. Everything was clean and looked brand new. His table saw had no hint of sawdust or speck of dirt upon it. The blade gleamed like it had been freshly polished, though I could have sworn I had heard him using it just the day prior. "Wow, you're really organized." "Well, I'm an engineer, and I've been told we're an odd breed. I like to keep everything tidy, and I like to have a place for everything. Sarah thinks I'm a bit OCD. Man, this is really something else. I'll need to buy some new tools now, I guess, unless we manage to find mine when we get everything unpacked." "Well, I'd recommend Ted's Hardware Store over on Main and 5th. They have a good selection, and their prices are pretty decent. I like to support the local businesses rather than the big chain stores or online places, so I've been shopping there for years." He went over to a tool chest and pulled out a screwdriver. "Here you go. Just bring it back when you get a chance," he said, handing it to me. "Thanks. Much appreciated." After walking away, I realized we still hadn't returned their casserole dish. 3 weeks later, I saw the screwdriver sitting on my workbench. I cringed and realized that we still had their casserole dish as well. At least he didn't seem to be taking it personally. I had seen him just that morning and he had smiled and waved, acting friendly. I decided to go over to his place and bring the items back to him. When I got there, though, nobody was home. I felt awkward just leaving the items on the porch or putting the screwdriver in the mailbox, especially after accidentally keeping it for weeks longer than intended. So instead, I just took them back home and told myself I would bring them back on the weekend. Of course, I forgot to do that once again. We were busy running errands and the screwdriver slipped my mind for a while once again. I didn't realize that Greg was upset at all until I woke up in this dark, narrow wooden box. The same box he'd been in his garage working on for days. He had his garage door open yesterday while sanding it, and I'd asked him about it. It looked like a wooden coffin, except it was smooth and had no gaps in the wood. The thing looked sturdy and the wood was thick and strong. "For a little experiment I'm working on," he told me with a grin. "I'll show you when it's finished." I was trapped inside here when I woke up, feeling claustrophobic immediately in the small enclosed space. I still had my phone, but noticed that all functions on it were disabled, except for a couple of apps like this one. My breath caught like a dry lump in my throat as panic gripped every part of my body. Pure terror like I had never felt before began to consume me. I closed my eyes and opened them again, trying to convince myself I was having a nightmare. I wasn't. I could smell the fresh sawdust of the box I was trapped in, but beneath that was the aroma of wet earth all around me. Alarm bells began to ring in my mind, and I tried to convince myself that it wasn't possible. I didn't want to accept the fact that I had been buried alive. My head was still spinning from whatever drugs I had been unwittingly injected with. My arm ached with a dull soreness as well, as if someone had stuck me with a large needle there. Pounding on the wood above me, I found it to be unyielding and sturdy. There was no hint of weakness across any part of it. Feeling groggy and sick, I turned on the flashlight on my phone to examine the lid of the coffin which I was trapped inside of. Phillips head screws were sealing it shut from the inside, hundreds and hundreds of them. They lined the edges spaced barely a quarter-inch apart from each other. They spelled out a message on the inside of the lid as well. I used the flashlight on my phone to read the words left for me on the lid of the wooden coffin I was trapped in. The message from Greg read as follows. "Dear Jordan, you should have returned my screwdriver. I didn't care about the casserole dish, but that was my favorite screwdriver. I needed it the other day, and it wasn't where it was supposed to be. Everything needs to be where it is supposed to be. You ruined it. You ruined everything. The voices told me where you are supposed to be. Underground. In the box they said to make for you. Bet you wish you had that Phillips head screwdriver right now, don't ya? Greg." I don't know how I'm going to get out of here. I don't even know where I am or if anyone knows I'm gone. But the air in the sealed wooden coffin won't last forever. I know that much. If you're out there, Greg, I'm sorry. You can have your screwdriver back. Just please let me out of here. I'm begging you. I'll be a better neighbor, I swear. I'll be the best neighbor you've ever had. I won't tell anyone you tried to kill me. Please, please let me out of here. You can borrow my shovel if you need to. Please borrow my shovel. I am marrying the man who is going to murder me. I was just an 8-year-old girl when I told my dad that I saw Mom naked wrestling with a man that wasn't him. She swore up and down that she never cheated on him, but Dad didn't believe her. 2 years after the dust had settled over the messy divorce, my mom started seeing a new guy she met in AA. She introduced me to him, but I already recognized him. He was the guy who I saw sleeping with my mom when I was 8, but they wouldn't have sex for the first time until 5 years later on their wedding night. Mom was a good woman. It was around that time that I realized that I could see things before they happened. I'll answer some of the questions you probably have. No, I don't know the winning lottery numbers. No, I don't get to choose what future I see. And no, it's not easy to change the future once I have a vision about it. My visions are a lot like one of those 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles. I get to look at the image on the box to see how it will turn out in the end, but it's like other people are putting the puzzle together, and I can't stop them. It might take a long time for them to be finished, or maybe there are only a few pieces left by the time I get involved. But for the most part, the pieces always fall into place. I can try to remove certain pieces, or rearrange them, or force the wrong pieces together. Sometimes I do end up changing the future for the better. Other times, all I ever accomplish is making the final result a lot sloppier, and sometimes nothing changes no matter what I do. When I was in high school, I had a vision of a close friend dying in a car crash. I went to the party where I knew he would get too drunk to drive, but try to drive anyway. So I stole his keys. He decided to take his girlfriend's car instead, along with his girlfriend. My original vision saw him dying shortly after running off the road, but since I intervened, he instead T-boned a minivan at 90 miles an hour, killing himself, his girlfriend, and the father of 4 in the other car. Like I said, sometimes when I try to change what is already supposed to happen, it ends up coming out a lot sloppier. There's always a chance that I make things worse, so I usually try not to change things. But there are some things that I just can't let play out no matter what else may happen. I was once at a restaurant and I recognized the couple across from me from one of my visions. In my vision, I was watching a news story about a beautiful young woman who was cut up into pieces and left in black plastic bags all over the city. It was her. The news story then went on to show the man who murdered her. It was him. From the looks of it, she was falling head over heels for the creep. I sent him drinks and flirted with him aggressively until he lost interest in her, which made her storm off in humiliation. I'm sure she hated me for doing that, but if she knew what she was headed towards, I'm sure she'd be glad that I intervened. I looked her up sometime after that. She's a practicing nurse now, still alive, has a boyfriend. Last I checked, he proposed. He seems like a much better guy than her date even pretended to be. Speaking of that monster, I never saw him in the news, which means he hopefully hasn't killed anyone. Or he just hasn't been caught. I hope I never get to find out which. It's so much worse being a woman with this gift, especially because I don't want to be alone forever. After I caused Mom and Dad to split up, I prayed every night that they'd get back together. But when it became clear that they never would, I promised myself that I'd find someone and have the happy marriage that I always wished they had. But being able to sometimes see how a date is going to end before it even starts has destroyed all my trust in men, and it is already hard to trust them. There are times that I feel like I am almost ready to get back into the dating scene, only to have a horrifying vision showing how putting my trust in a stranger plays out. I know that every guy isn't like that, but too many of them are, and I don't get to see the future of every date I go on, just a few of them. So the best I can do is avoid the truly awful men who attack me in my visions. But my visions have only saved me from some evil men. Some, not all. But I won't need to worry about other men anymore, because I know who I will end up marrying. I've had a vision of a moment we share together, sometime in the future. In it, he's wearing my father's wedding ring that I will give to him when I propose. Most guys are put off by a woman proposing, but not him. He has curly, dirty blonde hair, and his light blue eyes are full of tears as he kneels on my chest and covers my face with a pillow and holds it there until I eventually stop moving. Seeing a vision of my own death never gets any easier to process, no matter how many times I've seen it happen. I often think about all the ways I could die, just like everybody else does, but it's so much worse when you are shown the completed puzzle like that, especially when you don't know how many pieces are left before it becomes a reality. But there's one thing in this vision that makes it stand out from any other I've had before. Any other time I've had a vision of my own murder, my face always looks the same when I finally die. It's unmistakable. Even after the shock, or fear, or confusion, or pleading, I always die with this regretful look on my face. But not in that vision. Right before the man with the dirty blonde hair lays the pillow on my face, I look peaceful. I look ready. I look happy. I look like I know what is going to happen, like a woman with no regrets. A woman who feels safe and listened to and has been loved for years and years and years. I look like I finally understand something that could never be explained. I keep thinking about the way that I looked in that vision. In my entire 32 years of life, I have never felt anything close to what I have seen I could feel in my last moments alive. I never thought I would ever get to be happy. I've only ever imagined a deep, deep misery at the end of the line for me. As hopeless as it was lonely, I have spent my life convincing myself that my death would only be as painful and terrible as my life has always been. And I saw no way out, and I've tried to take my own way out multiple times. I want to feel the way that I felt in that vision, and I know it's possible. No, it's guaranteed. All I have to do is accept it and try not to change the future that I've already seen. I can get all the things that I want in life. I just have to die. I just want to be clear, I am terrified of dying. But I am more terrified of living a life that never gets to experience that one fleeting moment of happiness. I'd rather risk dying happy than survive being unhappy. I don't know if you'd understand unless you've lived my life. I don't know if anyone could. Full disclosure, I found the dirty blonde man in my vision. I've been dating him for a year now. He's so funny and kind, and he makes me feel so heard and supported. We've had ups and downs, but we always come back together to talk things out. I love him. I know he's the one. I know he's the one. I'm actually going to propose to him as soon as I'm done writing this. I'm going to offer him my dad's wedding band, of course. I'm pretty sure he's going to say yes. I'm both looking forward to it and dreading it at the same time. In January, my husband and our daughter both died in a car crash. They hit a tree at 70 miles per hour and died instantly on impact. My son, Aiden, took it the hardest. Harder than me. He had been in the back seat of the car and had barely escaped death. But he did lose an arm. His right arm was taken off by a branch, and he was lucky he didn't also die in that crash. Now it's just me and him. First, it was just a change in behavior. He acted odd, didn't talk much, and avoided coming down for dinner every now and again. He was still eating here and there, but he missed his dad and sister. Aiden was a daddy's boy, you could say, so I was patient with him for a while. Then he stopped eating completely, and whenever I approached him about it, he snapped and stormed off. Like I said, I understood. I had to be patient because I felt awful too, but I just didn't want Aiden to starve himself. It had gotten to the point where he was having violent stomach aches. I rushed him to the doctors. "You have to eat something, Aiden." I turned to him on the way home, and he silently nodded at me. When we pulled into the driveway, he rushed out of the car and up to his room. 1 month passed, not one meal. 2, 3, 4, 5. It just went on, and every time I asked, he just responded with something along the lines of, "I'm not hungry, don't worry, Mom." So I didn't. I let him be. I knew he was eating something because he couldn't survive on nothing for 5 months. But maybe he just wasn't comfortable eating at home. Eventually, I became sick of it. As a mother, I couldn't just let my son starve himself. It was now almost July, and the accident was in January, and even I had started to return to some sort of normality, so I took it upon myself to cook something for him. A nice, juicy steak with a side of French fries, and as I prepared the steak, the meat fell off the bone gently, hitting the tray it sizzled in. Knock, knock, knock. I knocked before pushing Aiden's door open, turning on the light. "I cooked you some—" I stopped, frowning. Aiden had something in his mouth which he was chewing like his life depended on it, and so I set the plate down on his drawers. "Aiden?" I stepped into his room as he swallowed whatever he was eating. "Nothing, just the Snickers from the fridge." Aiden seemed nervous and sort of ushered me out of the room. I accepted it and left the plate in there, standing silently as he closed the door behind me. The following day, something compelled me to look inside the fridge, and when I did, I regretted it. I had taken comfort in knowing Aiden was eating something, at least, but it turns out that the multi-pack of Snickers I'd bought wasn't even opened. So what the hell had he been eating? Something compelled me to find out, so my first course of action was to install a camera just outside of his room to see if I could catch him leaving the room to get food. A little pathetic, but I worry. Mothers do. I slept well that night, knowing that come morning I'd know. And I did. The camera picked up movement just after 4 a.m., and my son left his room to go downstairs. And around 30 minutes or so later, it picked up movement again, of him going back to his room with a small plate of meat. Perhaps it was the steak, but I had left that in his room. It was strange because he didn't leave his room after that. "Aiden, you awake, sweetie?" I knocked on his door. No answer, so I let myself in to see him sleeping silently, and I smiled a little, only to see the steak I'd cooked completely untouched on his drawers. I picked it up and left, going back downstairs. Just where was he getting the food from? I know that you may be thinking this is no big deal, but I just wanted to know. Because it wasn't from the fridge or anything of the sort, but it was on the plates from downstairs. And then I decided I'd catch him in the act. Again, pathetic, but I was seriously worried at this point. At 4 a.m. I heard movement, so I followed him downstairs quietly and out into the garden? In the dark, I saw a figure. It stood with one arm holding what appeared to be a shovel and the other arm missing. I stepped out into the backyard, causing the sensor to turn on and a dim light to illuminate the garden. The figure turned, revealing my son's face, mouth dripping with drool and standing in front of a small hole in the dirt. I stumbled backwards and fell to the ground, covering my mouth and muffling my screams. Oh, have I forgot to mention my husband and daughter were buried in the backyard? I'm never online shopping again. I messed up. I messed up so bad. I don't know if I'm in danger or going to jail or what. I don't know how I'm going to live with myself. This all started in the break room Wednesday. As I shoved my leftover Chinese into the microwave, Brian leaned back in his chair, inviting Dave to come over Saturday to light up the pit for his birthday. A small gathering, he said. I never get invited to those things. Never. I told myself it's because I'm in lower management, but I know the truth. I'm awkward around people. I try too hard. Man, I used to do a mean smoked chicken back in the day. I interrupted. I'd never smoked a chicken in my life, but I felt confident no one would be asking me to. Have a great party, Brian. I don't know why I butted in. I guess I was just tired of being ignored. As I reached for the door, fried rice steaming, Brian invited me to the party. I stopped, hand just short of the knob. Sure, I'd misheard. I know it's dorky to admit, but I had to shove my grin down a couple notches to avoid looking like Patrick Bateman as I turned back around and accepted. I still remember what I told him. "Oh man, I'm great at gifts. I'll see you there." In truth, I'm awful at gifts. I'd been sitting on my sunken couch looking around online for ideas for nearly an hour with no luck. Finally, I settled on a gag gift, something that could be regifted amongst the cool guys in the office occasion after occasion. I wasted another 15 minutes fantasizing about the guys passing the gift around and talking about how I started it all. How witty and funny I was. I could be an office legend. I know it's crude, but Brian had said it would be a small gathering. I figured a few guys from the office and maybe an old friend or two. I decided to take inspiration from my college days and scour the internet for a sex doll. I sucked my breath as I scrolled through the outrageous prices. Just as I was about to give up and go with an old-fashioned blow-up doll, I found a listing from Bad Dolls For You, and she was perfect. The doll's name was listed as Alice. The brief description under the picture proclaimed a taste of Wonderland. I couldn't help but chuckle. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and just over $100 with overnight shipping included, the fleeting thought occurred to me that at that price point she might be used. But honestly, did it matter? No one was going to be partaking in any activities with her. At least, I hope not. She was to be the white elephant gift passed among the guys. She was the legacy I'd leave behind as I moved my way up management. She was how the guys would know deep down I was one of them, and they could invite me to bar crawls and parties. She would deliver me from this god-awful loneliness. God, I was so stupid. Without any more hesitation or reading, I pressed buy now. I was giddy. She was perfect. I laid in bed that night fantasizing about the shock on Brian's face as he opened the gift. The guys would howl with laughter. They'd slap me on the back, give me some high fives. It was going to be great. The following morning, I woke up with an extra pep in my step. I hummed while I ran the steamer over my collared shirt and gave myself a foamy grin in the mirror as I brushed my teeth. As I strolled to the kitchen and grabbed my cup of joe, there was a swift knock at the door. It couldn't be. Not this early. And yet when I opened my apartment door, there stood a large box. I was elated. I dragged the box in quickly and slammed the door shut. In my excitement, I ripped the box open like a wild animal. I tore the packaging sheet off the top and paused. She was beautiful, sure, but she wasn't exactly as the ad had shown. Her blonde hair was a bit matted, like a childhood doll forgotten in the bottom of a toy box. One eye was a clear crystal blue and the other an odd yellow. Her freshly oiled bondage leather attire shone in the light. Maybe she wasn't perfect, but she'd do. With only 10 minutes before I needed to leave for work, I roughly brushed through her hair. She wouldn't win any awards, but she was smoother than before. Glancing back at the destroyed box, I realized I wasn't sure where to put her. My first thought was to just leave her out, but what if there was a maintenance emergency? I didn't want the office to think I was weird. I bit my lip and settled for the closet. I shoved her in quickly and went out the door. Work dragged on. Everything seemed so trivial knowing the work I had cut out for me at home. I had decided to pull Alice's hair into pigtails to further smooth her hair and give her another once over to make sure I hadn't missed anything else in my morning fumble with her. The guilt of cutting out 15 minutes early from work didn't haunt me like it generally would. I swung my apartment door open and bellowed, "Honey, I'm home." My chuckle was cut short as I entered my bedroom and found Alice lying on top of the comforter on my bed. I froze. Someone had been in my apartment, and they had moved her. I slowly approached the bed, looking Alice over. She certainly looked the same, but nonetheless, I decided to call the office to see if maintenance had been through. According to the impatient woman who answered, no one had entered my apartment. An eerie feeling swept over me, but I figured in my excitement this morning I'd opened the closet door, but for some reason laid Alice on my bed. I was excited and I must have been in a rush. I'm forgetful sometimes. Regardless, my enthusiasm had withered. I pulled and smoothed Alice's hair into pigtails before placing her into the closet and firmly shutting the door. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense that I'd been careless this morning. I'd spent a good chunk of the night lost in thought about my perfect surprise. I'd just hit the hay a little earlier tonight. I'd power through tomorrow, and the following day was the party. After a quick TV dinner, I slid into bed. The thought of Alice laying there staring up at the ceiling returned. I rolled over a few times, but eventually sleep came. I jerked awake suddenly to the terrible certainty that someone was staring at me. I was cemented on my back with my eyes fluttering quickly at the ceiling. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out something hovering a few inches from my face. I stifled a scream as I slowly turned my head towards the figure in the dark. Alice was bent down on all fours with her mouth stretched open far too wide for what she was intended for. Something in my brain, something primal that had helped my ancestors survive in the forest with carnivorous beasts, told me with great certainty that if I hadn't awakened when I had, she'd have eaten me. Her mouth would have continued to pop and stretch like a snake, and she'd have swallowed me whole. I shoved her hard and leapt onto my feet on the other side of the bed. Terror gripped me as I scrambled to escape my bedroom. I threw my gaze back into my room, expecting Alice to be yanking at the knob from the other side with her jaw jiggling unhinged at her chest. But nothing moved through the crack in the door. I flipped the light from the other side of the doorway and waited. I held my breath, but I couldn't hear anything over the roaring of my blood pressure in my ears. Slowly, I cracked the door completely open. I climbed back onto the bed and leaned over to see Alice sprawled out on the floor. Her head was turned sideways at an angle that begged a broken neck. Her yellow eyes stared dreamily under my bed. She looked different, paler, almost gray. Her youthful cheeks were now sunken. She looked long since dead. "Hey!" I yelled. I didn't expect her to answer, but there was a flood of relief when she didn't flinch. She won't move as long as I'm watching her. I didn't know where the thought had come from, but I knew it to be true. I reluctantly turned to boot up my laptop. I realized far too late that I should have read the rest of the ad. Something was very, very wrong with this doll. Alice was marked as out of stock, but the ad was still there to read. "A taste of Wonderland, the perfect doll for your enemy. Let her ravishingly good looks lull them into a false sense of security before the sweet Alice transforms into a cutthroat queen of hearts. Off with their heads. Just 3 days until your sweet, sweet revenge. Alice will eliminate her owner on the 3rd day, so please make sure she has been gifted to a new owner before that time. We advise leaving no return address. This isn't a gift you want returned to you. Happy haunting. My stomach felt full of ice. I was going to die. This goddamn doll was going to kill me. I threw my laptop against the wall and sobbed. I went to the garage, grabbed some leftover cheap rope from my room and 2 old bike locks and went to work tying Alice up. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I couldn't risk her moving around anymore. I'd die of a heart attack before she ever had a chance to kill me. Although at the moment, this might not be the worst way to go. Off with their heads flashed through my mind. Sleep didn't find me again that night, but in the early hours of the morning, I had made a decision. I didn't want to die. I would go to work, keep up appearances, and on Saturday, I would give Brian the doll. At work that morning, I was utterly distracted. Alice was bound on my couch, but the thought of not being able to see her worried me. At noon, I shut my office door. I jumped when my coworkers knocked and nearly vomited when the phone rang. At some point, I'd have to go home. At some point, I'd have to wrap Alice up, stick a shiny bow on her, and give her to Brian. At some point, I'd be a murderer. Despite my want to get everything over with, I found myself the last to leave the office. I stopped quickly at the store for wrapping paper. I meant to go straight home after and deal with Alice, but I stopped at the bar for a few drinks first. Lightly stumbling, I entered my home. As I flicked on the light, my heart shot out of rhythm. I slammed my fist against my chest twice before the cramp in my chest subsided. Alice wasn't how I'd left her. She stood in the center of the living room with her head tilted back, one hand raised in a fist, holding a butcher knife ready to thrust towards the ceiling like a victor's battle sword. She looked more rotted corpse than beauty. I'd had enough of this doll. I pried the butcher knife from her gnarled hand and laid her down on the floor. I had no thoughts as I wrapped her. When I was done, she resembled a dead body wrapped in a tacky wrapping paper instead of a sheet. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't risk her unwrapping herself. I took Alice with me and propped her against the garage wall as I reclined the passenger seat all the way and shoved her inside. I had no idea what I'd tell law enforcement if I was pulled over, but I couldn't risk not keeping an eye on her. Just after 11:45, I cut my headlights as I pulled in front of Brian's house. I nearly left. I started to cry again. I'd even switched the car back into drive with my foot pushed heavily on the brake, but the wrapping paper finally rustled. Exhausted and bordering on a psychotic break, I shoved the shifter back into park and got out of the car. Carefully, quietly, I took Alice to the door. I rang the doorbell 4 times fast and ran to my car. My tires squealed as I tore away from the house with just enough time to see Alice fall through the opening door. I didn't go to Brian's party. I couldn't. Guilt feasted on me through the weekend. I barely ate, barely slept. When I did, Alice was there, butcher knife in hand, rotted flesh flapping from her jawline as she screamed in a dying animatronic voice, "Off with their heads!" Today is Monday. I'm sitting at my desk. We've been open for just over an hour. Brian hasn't showed up or called in. Just before I posted this, I went back and checked Bad Dolls for You's ad. I wanted to reread it to make sure I didn't miss anything. The ad has been updated. 1 left in stock. Order now. Right after I graduated high school last spring, I started working at the motel in my small town. Being the only motel in about a 40-mile radius, we got a fair amount of traffic from truckers and tourists passing through to see the points of interest in rural Montana. Things like the Lewis and Clark Trail. The job didn't pay much, but no job in town did, unless I wanted to work on a ranch or farm for incredibly long and hard shifts. The motel, the gas station, or the pub were really my only options. Plus, my parents knew my boss pretty well and got me started at $1 an hour more than most maids. My days were simple. Every morning I would wipe down the front desk and chairs, vacuum the entryway rugs and carpet, and stock the vending machines before going to my assigned rooms. In each room I would change the bedding and start the laundry for the new sheets, pick up the room and throw away the garbage, vacuum, wipe down the tables and lamps, and clean the bathroom.
It was mind-numbingly easy work, and usually I was done by 2:30 in the afternoon, some days 4. Truckers are a messy breed. Being from a town so small, nothing ever happened, nothing important anyway. I was determined to save up enough money that by the end of the year, I could go to Montana State University and leave my sleepy hometown miles behind me. I was so bored that it made my teeth ache. Other than truckers and tourists, our motel is notorious for being a weekend getaway for couples who had husbands and wives back home. If you were having an affair and didn't want your small town to know, you could come to ours for the weekend and get away with it. Most of us only left for grocery shopping, and that was maybe a couple of times a month. 2 days ago, half of one of these couples checked into room 6. When the man showed up, she had apparently already left. They had been regulars here, coming about once every 2 months and staying Friday and Saturday night. When he'd showed up, I was stocking the vending machine. As my manager handed him his key, he said, the other one already checked out. Said she had something to take care of. I hadn't seen the woman leave, but it's possible she finally got cold feet or her husband found out where she was. The man furrowed his brow. She texted me like an hour ago and told me she was here. My manager, Gary, shrugged. Sorry, maybe she'll be back. But she returned her key before she left. The man grunted and rolled his eyes before heading to his room. I glanced outside and noticed her car was gone and shrugged it off. Yesterday, I went to room 6 to change the sheets around noon. I knocked, but got no answer. There was no "Do Not Disturb" placard on the door, so I opened it and went in. The room was empty, bed still made, though there was an indent like someone had sat on it. I straightened the sheets and checked the bathroom. None of the soaps had been disturbed, but there were some gnarly track marks in the toilet from a shit long since flushed. I cleaned the toilet and the sink, and I was about to move on when I noticed something under the bed. I kneeled down and picked it up. It was a woman's earring. One of those cubic zirconia ones from Walmart that's supposed to look expensive but instead looks cheap. I figured the lady who left must have dropped it. I brought it to the front desk. Hey Gary, found this under the bed in room 6. When he saw it, his eyes widened a bit. Oh, it must be from the last tenants in there. I'll call Felicity and see if it's hers. Instead of assuming it was the ladies who left suddenly, he assumed it was the local hookers. I found it a bit odd, but dismissed it. Gary and Felicity were old friends despite her chosen career, and he probably knew her jewelry better than I would. I handed him the earring and started cleaning the reception room. As I was cleaning the windows, I noticed the man from yesterday's truck still parked outside. Hey Gary, that guy's truck from the room 6 is still outside, but he didn't sleep in the room, I said. Oh! He hesitated for a moment. Yes, I saw him leave with Felicity last night. Figures, the man came for pussy and he was going to get it no matter what, I guess. I finished my rounds and by 2 p.m., I was free. I went home, showered, and changed out of my work clothes when I realized I had forgotten to grab my paycheck. I drove back to the motel and got out of my car, noticing the man's truck was gone. I went in and noticed Gary wasn't at the front, so I started my search for him. After 15 minutes of not being able to find him, I called. His phone went straight to voicemail. I waited in the reception room for another 5 minutes and was about to leave when Felicity pulled up, Gary in the passenger seat. There was a worried expression on his face, like he'd been caught doing something naughty. Hey kiddo, forget something? Yeah, my check. Oh, right, let me grab that for you. I followed him into the reception room as Felicity drove away. There was a small office in the far back that Gary kept locked. We weren't allowed in, ever. He said there was a lot of important paperwork in there that he couldn't afford to get messed up. I waited outside, but the moment he opened the door, an atrocious smell wafted into the air. I nearly vomited. As he brought my check out, I said, "Why don't I clean in there Monday? It smells like something died." His face paled. "Oh, no, I can get to cleaning it over the weekend. Don't you worry." One thing Gary did not do was clean. Like, ever. "Are you sure? I can add it to my morning rounds," I told him. "No, Melissa, thank you," he said sharply. I threw up my hands. "All right, have it your way." I grabbed my check and left. Today I drove to the town over to cash my check. While in the bank, I noticed the bulletin board had a missing persons poster on it. As I approached, I realized it was the lady who came into our motel a couple of weeks ago. Apparently, she had never returned home after her stay with us. She had met up with a much younger man, and apparently her husband and kids were now worried. Her last known whereabouts were at the bar in this town. I drove back home, and for the hour-long ride, I had a nagging feeling in my stomach. Finally, I called the non-emergency police line and let them know that her actual last known whereabouts were at the motel. They thanked me for the info and said they might follow up. I decided to go back to the motel and tell Gary about the situation. When I arrived, I again couldn't find him, so I opened the door to his private office. To my surprise, it was unlocked. In the center of the room was a ladder leading up to the ceiling. I glanced around the desk, papers, and receipts littered everywhere. The smell was even worse in the room, and I had to swallow hard and hold my breath to keep from vomiting. I noticed a picture of Gary and a lady, his ex-wife, sitting on the desk. My parents had told me the story and said to never bring it up. Gary's ex-wife had cheated on him and left him for his nephew about 15 years ago. As I studied the picture, I saw that the wife's eyes had been scratched out. I looked around but couldn't find the source of the smell. Baffled, I returned my attention to the ladder. As I climbed the rungs, the smell got worse and worse. I moved the ceiling tile over and popped my head through. Wooden planks had been added for support along the ceiling. Support of, I suppose, body weight? I thought Gary must be a perv, a voyeur that liked to spy on Felicity getting down with various truckers. As I crawled in, I followed the smell. It's not unheard of for an animal to crawl into warm buildings when it's cold out, get stuck, and die. My thought was that a raccoon or something had found its way into the ceiling and didn't find its way out. I was wrong. My nose led me to a spot over the laundry room, where the clean scent of laundry detergent mingled with the smell of a rotting carcass. As I searched with my phone flashlight, shuffling on my hands and knees, my finger touched something cold and squishy. I shined my flashlight to my hand and saw an ear. I screamed, louder than I even knew I could. I shook my hand off and began to cry, and then I vomited all over myself and the mutilated body part. I was close to passing out, but I willed myself to stay conscious as I began scooting back towards the ceiling entrance. My flashlight caught a glimmer as I moved back, a glimmer from the ear. A cubic zirconia earring dangled from it. I'm on my way to the police station now, but it's an hour-long drive. I'm frantically writing this in voice to type. Gary was calling me nonstop, so I blocked his number. But there are headlights behind me, and they're getting closer by the second. The headlights look just like the ones from the truck the man in room 6 drove. I'm still 20 minutes from town. I'm pushing 100 miles per hour, but the truck is still getting closer. I sent my parents my location. I'll update soon.
Don't trust the man with the ladder out looking for his dog. Okay, so here's how my encounter with the ladder man went down. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is that if you see this guy, you need to call the cops immediately. But, more importantly, just try and get the hell away from him. I was on a first date with a girl who I had met online, and she lived with her parents still. So she told me not to come to the door. I had a feeling she liked me, and after kissing her goodnight, I said I would call her the next day. She smiled and got out of the car, looking back over her shoulder at me and waving before going inside. The look back was always a good sign. I did a mini fist pump in the air and tried not to get too excited, but I was young and it was hard not to be. My car window was rolled down and I could hear noises coming from the backyard of Marissa's house. It was 1 a.m., so that seemed a bit odd. For some reason, don't ask me why, I decided to go back there and look. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach that I had never had before, and I've never experienced again since. It was like a rock sitting in my gut. I walked across the grass on legs that felt stilted and wrong, my heart hammering in my chest as the noises could be heard getting louder as I got closer. It was a person making those sounds, I could tell that much for sure. But Marissa said her parents always went to bed early, that they worked at 6 a.m., so we had to be quiet or else we'd wake them up. As I rounded the corner, I saw the shape of a man carrying a wooden ladder. I hid behind a tree and watched as he put the ladder up to the back of the house and began to climb up. That was when Marissa turned on the light in her room. I saw that her bedroom was the same one the man was climbing up towards. He stood near the top of the ladder and looked inside at her, watching her undress. That was about all I had to see. Ahem. Excuse me, what are you doing? The man didn't look surprised or shocked to see me. He simply climbed down the ladder and strode over towards me. I backed away, unsure of what to do. Marissa was still inside her house, unaware of what was going on, and I was alone.
Why, hello, young man.
So good to see you out here this evening." The man was smiling impishly, his gold fillings and large incisors shining visibly in the moonlight. He was wearing a plaid shirt and ripped pants, and I saw he was wringing his hands nervously as he talked. "Have you seen my dog? I've been looking everywhere for my sweet, beautiful little dog, and I can't find her anywhere. She's a brown dog, very cute. What do you say? Have you seen her?" The man was much larger than me, and I was young and unarmed, so I backed away from him, afraid and anxious not to get into a confrontation now that we were face to face. I regretted not just calling the police when I saw him spying on Marissa undressing. "No, I haven't seen your dog. She's not in there either. That's my girlfriend's house, and they don't have any dog." I hoped that he would get the hint, but instead he seemed to bask in my discomfort and naivety. "Aw, no Poochie for the princess, huh? How about you, Prince Charming? You like them puppies?" I backed away, the man's eyes wild and manic. He pulled out a knife and began to finger the blade of it, then ran it down the length of his tongue, leaving a long trail of blood. It looked like he was high on something, and I decided the best course of action was just to run away. That was what I did. With enough space between us, I made it back to my car and got the hell out of there. I called the cops from a payphone and then called Marissa straight afterwards. There was no answer at her house. I called again and again. The police came and interviewed me, and I told them everything. They said Marissa was fine, just scared. The man had left his ladder behind, and it matched the description from a string of cases in the area. A man had been going around the neighborhood breaking into places. His MO was very specific. He had been climbing up to the second floor of houses and breaking in. His targets were always the same, young blonde-haired women. When questioned about his reason for being in odd locations, multiple witnesses had reported him saying he was looking for his dog. He had killed 2 women, they believed, but what he had done to them before their deaths was even worse. Marissa called me a couple days later and said she owed me for saving her life, but that she didn't think she wanted to go out again. Whenever she thought of me, it brought to mind that night and what had almost happened to her. She just wanted to forget it all and pretend it never happened. I told her I understood. What else was there to say? We went our separate ways, and I thought that would be the end of it, until I received a phone call last night. The man on the other end of the phone was wheezing. He sounded old, but somehow familiar. His voice was distant and difficult to understand, but it was obvious he was smiling as he spoke. "I always get my princess eventually. Now I'm coming for you, Prince Charming." "Who is this?" I asked, already knowing the answer, knowing that voice, even now 20 years later. "I'm looking for my dog. Have you seen him?" Click. It was an unknown number, but I called the police and asked if they had a way to trace the call. They said they would try. This morning when they told me the phone call came from Marissa Smith's house in neighboring White Falls, I wasn't surprised. She had changed her name, or gotten married, or both, but the man had somehow found her anyways, even after all this time. And now, he was coming for me. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia, and would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the US by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's not so bad. It's basically camping in a metal tent. Makes you feel like you're really roughing it. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy. Maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. So, from my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and thus quieter than truck stops. Normally I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps. Most likely travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there as opposed to being bathed in sunlight, so I did my usual thing, locked my doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. Then a sharp tap woke me up. At first I thought I had heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes a bit confused since I was leaning back. I was facing the ceiling and couldn't see anything. I hear another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in a regular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree. Maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe a squirrel or a bird was dropping something? What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes. The keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. Still, I lay there completely still, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything, hoping whoever it was, they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was too afraid to find out. I was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. Still, the tapping continued. I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment, it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making the noise, so that's what I did. What met my eye sent a jolt through my entire body. Every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. There, in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone, I presume to be a woman, was lying on my hood, her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. The nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid, rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip of myself and shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making, in that instant, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. For a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario, the one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. I reversed as fast as I could, trying not to give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that, because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all fours. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and gunned it. Right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door, with my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek like that of an animal. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look as I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway. There I picked up speed and drove through the night. I did not dare stop again until I saw the morning light.
I live in a nice neighborhood in France. I will not disclose the name of the city for privacy reasons. I moved here about a year and a half ago, and honestly, life was going great. I had friendly neighbors who came to my house to introduce themselves as soon as I moved in. There was, however, one exception, my closest neighbor. He was reclusive to say the least, and he never really talked to me and had a big fence surrounding his house. We'll call him Tom. Tom was a weird guy ever since I moved in, but I honestly couldn't complain about him. He kept to himself and went about his business, never bothered me or anyone else as far as I'm aware, and was never loud. That's why when one night I woke up at 3 a.m. to hear him screaming in his backyard, I thought he was in trouble. I went to put on my trousers, but the screaming suddenly cut out. And I don't mean stopped, it sounded like you pressed stop on a tape. So I thought nothing of it. However, I did have trouble sleeping that night because my mind was wondering what could have happened. Next day I go about my business, I wake up, have some coffee and breakfast, and I head off to work. I see Tom at his front porch. I wave to him, and just like he always does, he half-heartedly waves back. I guess nothing is wrong after all, I mumbled under my breath. I was sure there was a good explanation for it. I come home from work more exhausted than usual. I take a shower, have dinner, and decide I'm going to sleep early tonight. I woke up once again at 3 a.m. at the dot because of my neighbor's screams. Once again, I go to put on my trousers and the screaming stopped. This time, however, I'm going to go to his house and confront him. He was disturbing my sleep after all. I went to his yard and I didn't see anything outside, and all the lights were off in the house. I was sure it was him screaming, however, so I decided to knock on his front door. Knock, knock. Hey Tom, could you come out for a second, please? I said into the chilly night air. No response. Knock, knock, knock. Tom, I've heard you screaming. I know you're not asleep, I said in a tone a bit more agitated than before. Once again, no answer. It was starting to get really cold, so I just decided I was going to confront him when I head off to work in the morning. I do my morning routine, and as I leave the house, I'm thinking on what to say without looking like an unfriendly neighbor that gets bothered by everything. I go to my driveway and I look over. This time he's not on his front porch. I could, however, hear noises that sounded like digging in his backyard just over the fence. I go to check it out. I was planning to confront him anyway, so it wouldn't hurt going over to his house to do so. It would give us more privacy anyways. I head over, and as I expected, he's digging a hole in his backyard. It seemed like he was doing it for a pretty long time based on the size of the hole. Hey Tom, how's it going? I asked in a friendly tone and got back grunts as a response. I wanted to talk to you about the last 2 nights. You've been waking me up at 3 a.m. screaming, and it's not very nice. I have to get up early for work, I said, trying to sound as friendly as possible with the irritation of being ignored building up. Tom finally stopped digging and turned to me. That was the first time I actually got a good look at his face, and he looked like he hasn't slept in days. Okay, is the only response I got from him. Thinking he was going to stop doing it, I simply turned around, said goodbye, and left for work. I came home from work, and for some reason, my curiosity made me look in his backyard. I took a look at the spot where the hole was just this morning, but it was gone. And I don't mean covered up. It looked like it never even happened. Weird, I thought, but I just headed back to my house, watched some movies, and I got an idea to put my alarm 5 minutes before 3 a.m. and see if he does it again. And if so, for how long does he do it? It sounded like the screams were the same length both times I've heard them. I wake up at 2:55 a.m. and I wait patiently, and without a fail, exactly at 3 a.m., my neighbor starts screaming. I time it and it lasted exactly 10 seconds. Was this some sort of recording? I said to no one in particular. It has to be. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, for a human being to be that precise every time. So I time him for 2 more nights, and surely enough, every time it starts at 3 a.m. and ends in 10 seconds on the dot. I was mostly confused by the sounds. I thought it had to be a recording or something, so I decided to mount a video camera on my house looking down at his backyard. It was still on my property and caught parts of my yard, so I wouldn't get in trouble with the law if he decided to go to such extent. So I mount the camera, wait until 3 a.m. and the screaming to stop. I take out the tape to see it, and I don't see anything. It was too dark. He didn't use any lighting. Also, something I failed to mention, every morning without fail he would dig a hole in the ground and it would be gone by the time I'm home. Well, the only way is for me to get the night vision extension for my camera, I thought to myself, and decided I'm going to do just that tomorrow on my way home from work. I got into the store, bought the extension, and headed back home. Excited to see what is my neighbor actually doing and to finally figure out why he's screaming or playing a tape of himself screaming. I got home, put on the extension, and waited for the time to hit. At exactly 3 a.m., I hear the screaming again. The same screaming I was getting used to hearing. It lasted 10 seconds, as usual, but when I got my camera and played the video, I found something that would chill me to my bones. What I saw was my neighbor going into the spot where the hole usually was, pick up the grass patch that somehow fit perfectly to cover the hole up to the naked eye, and there was a wooden trapdoor under it. Without hesitation, he opened the hatch, got in, and exactly when 3 a.m. hit, I could hear the screams. They were coming from inside. The truly disturbing thing is what came out of the trapdoor. It was my neighbor, but he looked even weaker. He looked half dead almost. I had to know what was under that trapdoor, and I knew he left every Sunday to visit the church, so I waited until Sunday to make my move. When the Sunday came around, I waited for him to head off to the church, and I slowly went to the spot, which was now still covered with the grass patch, even though it would be a normal hole at this time of the morning usually. I lift the patch, open the hatch, and I see nothing. It's just a normal hole. I felt silly for even trying to do it, but something told me that there was more to it. So I decided that I will open it at night when he's finished with his screaming and take a look for myself what's inside of it. Night came around and I was prepared. I waited for his screams, and when they ended, I headed out for his backyard, for the hole in his backyard. In that moment, I did something I regret and will regret for the rest of my life. I opened the hatch. What I saw in there is not explainable. Human minds are not meant to see or experience such things. I felt lost. At that moment, I screamed. I screamed for 10 seconds. No more, no less. What I saw in there was a void, not just darkness. I felt enveloped by it. I felt like I could see everything and nothing at the same time. I felt powerful, yet so weak. I finally understood why he looked so exhausted. The void needs a host to feed, and it needs to feed to exist. So I'm writing this story to ask someone to come help me dig a hole. 3:01 a.m. is getting closer.
I don't know what the hell happened a few days ago. Maybe one of you can shed some light on it. 4 days ago, me and my girlfriend Lauren are in our house about to binge watch Game of Thrones. We both had the day off. After plopping down on the couch with a big ass bowl of chicken nuggets, we spent the next 2 hours or so watching it. Then my phone rang. I stared at it for a few seconds, making sure I was seeing it right. It was Lauren's number on the caller ID, but her phone was sitting on the table. I showed it to her. Well, this should be interesting. Answer it. So I answered it. Hey babe, the shop is pretty dead right now. I've got the laptop. You want to come down here? We can watch a movie. She works in a computer shop. When she's working and I'm off, that's usually what we do. Who is this? What do you mean? It's Lauren. Nice try. You're spoofing your caller ID. This is Rachel, isn't it? Rachel is my sister, but it did sound like Lauren on the phone. Why would Rachel have my phone? I just said it's Lauren. What's your problem? Okay, if this is Lauren, what's the password on the laptop? It's... Are you done playing? I hung up after that, then turned to Lauren. Did you put someone up to this? Of course I didn't. I wouldn't give out my password. I use the same one for everything. I wasn't sure what to do after that, so we just got back to the show. I didn't give it much thought until 2 days later. I was still off, but Lauren had to work. Her boss Mark was there, but he's pretty cool about me hanging out. We got to talking about the phone call from fake Lauren. When we mentioned it happened and that she wasn't working then, he looked confused. But you were working. Chloe called in sick and she told me you would cover her shift. No, I was at home. Chloe never called me. Let's see what happened then. Mark pulled up the video from the security cameras and we officially entered what the f territory. In there, in the video timestamp showing the same time as the phone call, was Lauren at the counter. There's no denying it was her. Same outfit she was wearing that day, same streak of purple in her hair, same tattoos on her arms, but it gets weirder. Not only was the laptop sitting on the counter, the same laptop we were watching Game of Thrones on at the time, but the Lauren in the video was on her phone, and she was saying exactly what the woman on the phone said to me. Here comes the weirdest part. Mark fast forwards the video to when Lauren gets off. We watch her send a text, and a few minutes later, guess who shows up to get her? I do. Somehow I'm picking Lauren up from work, while at the same time, Lauren and I are at home. A different camera shows them get in my car, which was in the garage at the time, and drive away. They never showed up at our house. Where did they go? Who were they?